Hi, I'm David from Outlier Technology, where we take your toughest business questions, remove the tech headaches, and leave you with clear, defensible answers. Check us out at outliertechnology.co.uk. In this video, we're going to be talking about data quality projects. And in particular, we're going to be focusing on a situation where your organization has committed to embarking on a data quality project. So the DQ train is already running and it's your job to make it successful. So the first part of this type of project, the typical approach that happens with this kind of project is they tend to start from the bottom up. What I mean by that is the very first thing they do is treat data quality as a domain in its own right, as an outcome that we need to try and achieve. We need to improve data quality. And this starts to feed into various different aspects of our organizational structure and how we can apply data quality disciplines to those parts of our organization. For example, data quality in engineering, whether that's data engineering or software engineering, data quality for product management. If we're moving in that kind of direction, so we're treating data quality as a thing in its own right, very quickly we start looking for tools and we will find them. There are loads of tools available. And then we can start looking at those tools and evaluating features and saying, oh, operations teams could use these features in these ways. Our software engineering teams can use these features in all of these different parts of their software development cycle. But the danger with all of this is you end up spending a lot of time and a lot of money focusing on data quality as the outcome in itself. And you can start making progress. It's very easy to start confusing motion with progress. We're buying tools, we're implementing things, we're changing processes. We look very busy, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're having any sort of meaningful impact on the business at all. And some of these things that we end up addressing, maybe phone number formats. That's a classic one. We need to make sure all of our phone number formats are consistent. And the thing is, these might be possibly of value somewhere. But unless we're going to identify the specific scenario in which those changes to data quality will help, we've got no link to the specific benefits that we're going to deliver. And it's this kind of low-hanging fruit approach that offers us plenty of opportunity to spend time and money and effort. But within that, there's no guarantee that just because something is easy to do, that there's value in it. So then we need to look at a better way to address a data quality project. So the first thing that I would say is stop thinking about data quality as a useful thing in its own right. It isn't. It just isn't a useful thing without an outcome that it supports. We can improve historic data. We can go and change phone number formats. We can go and look up addresses. But if there's no meaningful outcome that supports, it's wasted time, effort, and money. If you can reduce costs, for example, by improving data accuracy, or you can improve revenue by removing the source of error in your data, then that's great. That's the exact kind of thing that we want to look for. It's a tangible and measurable outcome, but it's not a data quality outcome in its own right. It's a business driver that we're trying to identify. So if you're in this position where you've been handed the data quality project as a whole, you can take the position that, okay, I know you want me to do a data quality project, but I'm going to start from the top. I'm going to start by looking at the business problems that we're facing and not just start with the underlying technical problems. And the way to do that is to start talking to the teams and try to understand the problems that they're facing. What's actually being impacted? Is there some issue with revenue? Is there some issue with costs? Is there some issue with customer churn? Is there a regulatory risk that needs to be addressed? And you have to be able to measure that before you start trying to fix anything. And as you do that, you'll very likely come across lots of problems that have got nothing to do with data quality at all. So for example, you might go to your finance team and say, tell me your data quality problems. There's a very good chance that they'll have no idea what you're talking about. They don't talk in the language of data quality. They talk in the language of their domain. And this is a really important point in terms of how you go and speak to different teams. You need to align your talking and your language with their domain, with what they talk about, what's relevant to them. So if we look in finance, for example, they talk in terms of reconciliation, of balancing, of journaling, of accruals. All of these things have relationships with data quality. They all have relationships with data governance, but they also have a core purpose, which is to try and ensure that the financial system of record remains intact, is consistent, and is a realistic reflection of the position of the business. So that's the outcome. It's not data quality as a thing in its own right. It's to make sure that when we look at our financial system, it tells us the financial state of the business. So by looking at that terminology or using that terminology when we're talking to those teams, then we can start to identify, are there tools that we could bring to bear that might help those teams either be more efficient or get additional levels of detail in the data quality measurements that they're performing, or perhaps plug gaps that they've not been able to plug themselves. So you can translate all of those things into data quality speak, but ultimately when you're talking to those teams, you need to be thinking about talking in their domain, because they don't really have a need to learn about data quality as a subject, because actually they're already doing it and they've been doing it for a very long time. They just don't call it that. And also, if you go to them and say, tell me your data quality problems, they might come up with something like, oh, it's really annoying when the customer doesn't put the purchase order number on the invoice or the supplier, for example. It's likely that you're not going to be able to do anything about this unless you can push back to the supplier and have them change their process, which is possible. But unless you can push back to the people upstream, there's very little that you can necessarily do about that in its own right. But what you can do is look at what the team does today to address that problem when it happens. What do you do when the purchase order number is missing? What do you do? And you can look for opportunities there to help automate if it's possible. If the answer is to reject the invoices and reply back to the supplier to say, your invoice is missing a purchase order number, it can't be accepted, maybe that's the right thing to do. But it has to be in the context of the problems that the team is facing, and actually whether there is any value in that, meaningful value. Yes, you can solve a pain point, but does that actually improve some sort of business outcome for you? How much cost is associated with that extra step that someone in the finance team has to take when that reference number is missing? And is the cost of you implementing something going to pay for itself? And over what timeline is that going to happen? So the other thing I would strongly suggest avoiding, and this is from an engineering perspective, is don't necessarily just look at the tools, for example, that a finance team are using to perform their reconciliations. It's very easy from an engineering standpoint to look at the use of Excel and spreadsheets to do lots of work within finance and say we can replace that with a database, and we can replace that with all sorts of technology and make things faster and easier. But ultimately, if the tools that finance are using are cheap and it's quick and it's reliable, you have to identify whether your replacement is going to be so much quicker and so much cheaper and so much more reliable and still offer the level of flexibility that they need. And again, it's resisting that temptation to look from a bottom-up or a technology perspective and say, well, look, we can replace all of that with a better technology. But actually, that's almost irrelevant. It's the outcome that they're achieving that is way more important. So to summarize, my overall advice would be, first of all, stop looking at data quality as a thing. It's a synthetic domain. It's not a real thing in its own right. It only has value when it's linked or applied to a genuine business outcome. So look for the genuine business outcomes that you need to support. When you're going through the process of identifying those things, you will almost certainly find lots of different business problems that are not going to be improved by data quality alone. But you need to keep going, and you will find some that can be improved. And if that is the scope of your project, and that scope of the project is rigidly on data quality, then you'll need to keep looking for data quality problems, but keep them anchored to the outcomes. And finally, I would say make sure that you're talking to the teams in their language. Focus on their domains and their problems and the way that they talk about data quality, because in a lot of cases, they will already be doing it. They're just not referring to it in those terms. And if you talk about it in their terms, you will find it much easier to discover areas that you can help and you can have meaningful impact on their day-to-day